the United States sent a working group to explore its company's participation in the Belt and Road Forum, which wrapped up on Monday. How would the US actually take part in the Belt and Road Initiative? What role does it want to play? Against the trend of anti-globalization, China is sparing no effort to push its Belt and Road Initiative, aiming to build a trade and infrastructure network connecting Asia with Europe and Africa and beyond. How can China best continue to promote global governance and an open trading system? After the Xi-Trump meeting in early April, what can we expect from a new round of BIT negotiations? What impact will they have on the prospects for Sino-US economic relations? Asian American politicians have played an increasing role in American political affairs. How can they help promote China-US relations, and what are the barriers?
How a Chinese American congressman looks at the Belt and Road Initiative might be more important than the initiative itself. Today, I'm very much honored to be joined here by Congressman David Wu to share his experiences about politics in the DC, as well as why James Comey, former FBI director, has been fired by President Donald Trump. Welcome to Dialogue.
It's very nice to be here, Ray.
What do you think of the Belt and Road Initiative from the American perspective?
Well, from my personal perspective, and to the extent that I think that some people have considered this in the United States, I think it's a positive initiative. It follows historic trade routes. China has been a positive contributor along the Silk Road for a very long time, 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 years. And to the extent that it builds goodwill and economic pluses for all parties along the way, it's a very, very positive initiative. The sea lanes, obviously, are an important component of it, and I also hope that it makes a positive contribution to the nations along the way.
You retired from the Congress some 5 years ago. What are you doing here to help set up the bridge between the two countries?
Well, I am writing a book for the Chinese market. I give talks both in China and in the United States about participation in public life. And I think that there is great hope in both countries. Chinese youth are very interested in the future of China, and Chinese Americans are interested in taking a larger role in public life in the United States, and I want to give them the tools to do that and encourage their interest.
Let me ask you one tough question. During the Clinton administration, you were one of the congressmen who opposed the MFN, Most Favored Trading Nation status. You still want the trading status to be linked with the issue of human rights. Now, China has become the fastest growing export market of the United States. President Xi Jinping even went to Florida to have a summit meeting with his American counterpart, talking about how to strengthen the trade bonds and to help create jobs for your newly elected president. Now, do you think the issue of human rights will still get in the way to prevent the two countries from getting closer? I have noticed that your president refuses to talk about human rights as much as Hillary Clinton, former Secretary of State. Do you think this will help lay the groundwork for promoting mutual trust as well as trade itself?
Well, I want to make clear that my position when I was in Congress was no criticism of the Chinese people. The United States and China have historically enjoyed very, very positive relations. I think that it was basically from the Korean War to the end of the Vietnam War that was a very trying period in Sino-American relations. But otherwise, in 200 years, let's say that 180 of them have been very, very positive. And I think that good progress by the Chinese people is a very, very important thing, and I thought that we could play a positive role. And I must say that, human rights has become 一个非常敏感的题目, and it it's not just a problem at governmental levels, but I've found in talking with ordinary Chinese that Chinese don't react well to that terminology. So I think that we can start in some other places where we do agree. Environmental protection, the importance of transparency in government, and other issues that relate to fairness for the individual under virtually all circumstances. So times change, values don't.
Many Chinese travel to the United States seeking American dream, or that could be part of the Chinese dream as a result. Do you expect them to come back with not only what they have learned from the curriculum about science, technology, humanity, but also about governance of a country? I raise this question against the broad background of the campaign success of Donald Trump. Now, this guy comes, and sorry for saying that, your president comes under fire from the establishment, the media, elites, so on and so forth. Now, what do you think of the idea of democracy itself? Will it necessarily bring about the good results?
Well, first, about the first issue that you raised about foreign graduate students returning to China. I spoke with a good friend who is a graduate of Tsinghua, and I asked her what her estimate was of the percentage of Tsinghua students who return to China, and she said about 50%. The 50% who stay in the United States, I think, will be real contributors to the future of America. I think the 50% who come home to China will be real contributors to the future of China. And I think that the things that they bring back are not just technical knowledge and things, but also some of the things that they have seen, which I think are for the Chinese people to decide whether they are appropriate for this environment, but perhaps by learning some of the things that they've seen in the United States, it gives a wider spectrum of options. And I certainly hope that that is the case. With respect to your second point about Mr. Trump, he is a unique case, singular in American history. In 240 years, there has never been a man like him occupying the president's office. He has no prior experience in public office. He has no prior experience in military life. Every other American president has had that kind of experience. The developments in the first 110, 120 days, I think, are indicators that perhaps governmental experience is worth something, and that a successful businessman may not necessarily be a successful leader, public leader. But I do have to say this about the system of governance. In 240 years, well, let's take a step back. My good friend Frank Fukuyama, a professor at Stanford University, comments and writes about a wide range of societies and their governments. And one of the points that he makes is that when you have centralized authority, when there is a good emperor, it's a very, very effective form of government. But when you have a bad emperor, it's a very, very, very bad system. And in 240 years, we have elected exactly one bad emperor. He's in office right now. Now, I would challenge other countries to say, well, how many bad emperors have you had in 240 years? And I think if you look at the European countries and other places, they've probably had more than one bad emperor.
But do you think that one good emperor is better than a bad president?
Well, I'm not sure I understand the question, but let me take a stab at answering.
Let's paraphrase my question a little bit, Congressman Wu. Mr. Lee Kuan Yew, former or late founding father of Singapore, said famously, that the majority of the Chinese feel comfortable with having a strong central government. Whilst in your country, this man who's elected into the Oval Office of the White House is called an emperor in 240 years of your political history. In our case, perhaps we are able to carry out and execute good economic policies effectively to ensure the rise of a 1.3 billion population. And that's a miracle in human history. In your case, it's about deglobalization, rejecting immigration. So you have many other reasons to complain about the presidency of Donald Trump. And therefore, a healthy development of the economy might be called into question as a result. What do you think of this?
Well, since you put that point on it, let's consider this. Since 1949, how many good emperors and how many bad emperors has China had? I'll let Chinese answer that question. Since 1949, how many good presidents and how many bad presidents has the United States had? And different Americans would make different judgments about that. We have a system of government where no one is above the law, and there are checks and balances. So there are limits as to how rapidly things can happen. In my view, that is actually a very good thing because it allows a society to adjust. It's like a radiator, a car radiator. If there's a lot of pressure in it, you turn the cap a quarter turn and it lets the pressure off gradually. If you take the cap off very rapidly, which is the case in some societies, you'll blow the cap out and a lot of water will go all over the place. So a democracy is sometimes not the most efficient, but it's really letting the cap with the pressure out, turning the cap a quarter at a time. So you won't necessarily have the efficient steps that authoritarian governments might have, but you don't make as large mistakes either. And if you want to take on the question of economic growth, then compare the growth of the American economy from 1949 to 2017 versus the growth of any other country from 1949 to 2017. China has had a terrifically positive experience in the last few years, and I hope that continues, but you have to set good conditions for that to happen, and that's something for the Chinese people to decide what works best for China.
One senior diplomat from South America said recently that perhaps it's time to look at the Chinese way of development from a more tolerant perspective. Yes, there are universal values. However, when it comes to governance of the country and of the economy, one thing concerning the integrity of the Chinese governance is that it could ensure sustainable, continuous development with regard to industrial policies especially. We'll take California as an example. 3 generations of the governors there have been talking about how to build a high-speed railway, and yet nothing has come to any avail. It's because of opposition, criticism, supervision, and let's look at the thing broadly, politics in the DC, across the aisle of 2 parties. Now you have endless politics. So politics tend to derail real democracy. And when President Trump vows to put America first, he has met major setbacks. Instead of winning a unanimous support or building consensus to rally people from across the aisle behind him to support the vision of a man who is elected by the American people. So if you look at the 2 political systems in this perspective, perhaps our American friends might put aside the issue of universal values and your greatness of the American political system aside and look at China more objectively.
Well, I'm not sure it's a case of looking at China more objectively. I think that it's a matter of reaching for those things that people share, which is a sense of fairness. Reaching for those things that people share, which is a matter of having input in your own life. And having input in your own life has an economic component, and it has a social and political component. Each society decides how to do that in different ways. And America has never sought to impose that, or it certainly shouldn't try to impose that on anyone else. But I think that Americans have always tried to support other people who are trying to do that for themselves. And I think that is what is in the best tradition of what America has tried to do. Now, the examples that you have given, high-speed rail in California, well, perhaps the project deserves to be held up through three gubernatorial terms, because is it needed? Is it not needed? That's something that needs to be sorted out before you make a multi-billion-dollar decision. We in America have what we call a way of kicking the road down the can, kicking the can down the road. And sometimes a decision doesn't need to be made exactly today. And in fact, if you force it to be made today, you might make the wrong decision, or maybe there are no good alternatives. So waiting for a while is frequently the best alternative. There are other decisions that you should make right away.
President Xi Jinping promised to deliver a 100-day initiative about how to improve the economic relationship between our two countries during the summit meeting with his American counterpart in Florida. Whether that initiative is better than the Belt and Road Initiative, I'm not sure. But since the summit between Mr. Xi Jinping and Donald Trump in early April, China and the United States have made what they call positive progress on key issues in their economic dialogue. Although the U.S. recognizes the importance of China's Belt and Road Initiative and sent delegates to attend the Belt and Road Forum in Beijing, it is uncertain how the U.S. might participate in the initiative. You are watching Dialogue with Congressman Wu. We are discussing not only the Belt and Road, but also how to promote mutual understanding about the different forms of governance on both sides and the variety of political institutions in the age of globalization. We'll be back in a short while. Stay with us, please. Welcome back. To take a closer look at the Belt and Road Initiative, we not only have to discuss the summit meeting and the agenda between President Xi Jinping and his American counterpart, we need to take a closer look at political participation by ethnic Chinese in the United States. Today we are very much honored to have Congressman Wu to join us for brainstorming about these and other issues. Welcome back, sir.
It's good to be here.
Right. What do you think of the general picture about political participation by the Chinese Americans? With you as an example, Gary Locke, Elaine Chao, who else can you mention?
Well, I think that political participation is on the rise for Chinese Americans in particular, and Asian Americans in general. I think the history of American immigration is that in the first immigrant generation, political participation is relatively low, and then it climbs from there. There are some historic factors with respect to Asian Americans. Asian Americans come from cultures where political participation is discouraged, frequently with centralized government that don't consult the people. But they've come to a democratic country, and participation is very, very important to have your voices heard.
Perhaps you only focus on the United States.
Let me finish this thought, which is that there is a personal component as well as a social component, because immigrant parents want their children to live a good life. So they encourage them to go into professions that are quite rewarding, secure, economically secure, and they also want them to go into professions where there are solid metrics rather than value judgments that may not be metric based. And what I mean by that is when you're an engineer, there are metrics for performance. When you are a doctor, there are metrics for performance. But if you are a studio artist, or for God's sakes, a politician, there are no particular metrics. So Asian American parents are very, very reluctant to have their children go into that. And it takes a while. It may take a generation or two for more Asian Americans to participate, but that's happening now.
Well, you may be a role example about political participation by Chinese Americans. You went to Stanford, Harvard, and Yale. The glow of your academic performance has indeed impressed people like me. I've done a lot of homework about your background. But why did you decide to give up the dream of becoming a scientist and end up being a politician in the DC?
I always aspired to help people and to make a broad difference in society. And when I wanted to go into science, it was really with the aspiration of pushing the limits of human knowledge. And I pulled back from science per se and went into medicine. I hoped to do research and have patient care and teach. During my first year of medical school, I realized that in a developed country, doctors don't play the role that they play in developing countries. In developing countries, doctors play a much broader role. Zhongshan Sun Yat-sen was a physician. Che Guevara was a physician. Mm-hmm. Doctors in America don't do that. So I wanted to make a big difference, a broad difference at least. And so you might be amused by this. When I was during that first year of medical school and I wasn't very happy, I started reading obituaries in the New York Times. And the people who were doing the broader things that I thought would be very interesting were all legally trained. They were not necessarily practicing lawyers, but they were legally trained. So I thought, you know, maybe I want to do that. So I went to law school, and the rest is history.
What do you think of Elaine Chao, who was appointed by your president as the Secretary of Transportation? She was Secretary of Labor during the Bush administration. Is that something unprecedented for Chinese Americans?
Well, she has led an unprecedented life of public service, mm-hmm. and I am a great admirer. She has taken one path, a non-elective path, and I have taken a different one. I think that hers may be even more difficult, but she has played a number of very important and difficult roles. By the way, one of the difficult roles is to be the wife of Mitch McConnell, who's the Senate Majority Leader.
That's my next question.
Okay.
Is that the major reason for her to be appointed Secretary of Transportation, because of her husband?
Oh, no.
The party whip, Mitchell McConnell, the party whip, might serve as a go-between so that President Trump could play politics in the Congress.
I don't think that Elaine has ever benefited from her relationship with Mitch. I think that there are as often things that hurt in being so close to a powerful person, mm-hmm. As things that help. And honestly, I've read articles that speculate whether Mitch McConnell is completely dependent on Elaine Chao, so it cuts both ways.
Well, excuse me, I don't follow American politics very closely, but what's the party affiliation of her husband?
He's a Republican.
Republican. Well, they share, I mean, your president and her husband share the same background. Look, one thing that made front page stories is the resignation of Michael Flynn, as well as lately former director of FBI, who is supposed to serve 10 years. Mm-hmm. He was appointed by Obama. Mm-hmm. But why was he fired? Was it because his refusal to display loyalty to the president? He said he would only be honest with the president, but not loyal. He would only be loyal to the Constitution. What do you make of the current fuss?
You know, every public official at the federal level swears an oath to the Constitution of the United States. They do not take an oath to any one person. or anything else other than to the Constitution. And every military officer in America also takes an oath to support, defend the Constitution of the United States of America. So that's the way it works. And if someone asks you to do something that you think is counter to your values or what you think, let me amend that. I think it's really counter to your duties. Then it is your duty to stand up and say so. Sometimes you do it privately and sometimes you do it publicly. I don't know what happened between FBI Director Comey and Mr. Trump. I'm not sure that anyone will know for quite some time. I'm quite curious about that. The FBI director does serve at the pleasure of the president, who can remove him for any reason or no reason. I myself find it peculiar and perhaps quite objectionable that Mr. Trump chose to remove Director Comey at this particular time with very important investigations going on.
Investigation about Russian contacts. After the firing, many media compared the sudden incident with the dismissal of Watergate Special Prosecutor Archibald Cox in 1973. What do you make of the comparison, and how do you think Comey's dismissal will affect America's democracy?
Well, America has very, very strong democratic institutions, and I think the institutions ultimately will be much stronger than any particular individual. But it also takes people to defend institutions, and I think people are coming to the defense of American democratic institutions. I think that Mr. Trump has a misplaced sense of being able to demand personal loyalty from people who, under American law, have obligations to discharge their duties in a way that are not partial toward any particular person. And I think that that's a lesson that he needs to learn if he's going to be able to govern effectively. He's not the head of an all-powerful government or an all-powerful party. He has to get along with people with different viewpoints and also respect the very important constitutional roles that everyone around him has sworn to discharge.
Very quickly, do you foresee a repeat of Watergate?
Only time will tell, because the evidence isn't there yet about a smoking gun. But this doesn't smell very good right now.
Thank you so much. Maybe it depends on whether President Trump would agree to hand out the tape about the conversation that he had over dinner with James Comey. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.